had just finished a great work conference. We were full of knowledge, we were relationally recharged, and we were heading back to our families for Thanksgiving. So we said goodbye to our teammates, and my husband and I drove off. About half an hour down the road, I got a phone call from my friend Erin. And Erin said, "Have you talked to Megan lately?" One of my coworkers. And I said, "No, I just said goodbye to Megan. I haven't talked to her." And Erin said, "Something has happened." Erin's tone wasn't good, so I called Megan. We were on some back roads. The reception was spotty. I couldn't hear very well. But through her tears and the reception, I heard that the car in front of hers had skidded off the road, over a bridge, and into a ravine. And that car was carrying 3 of our colleagues. Megan was driving the second car. Richard got out of that car and ran down the ravine to see what was going on with our friends. Chris and I pulled our car over and we waited. A few minutes later, Megan called and said they've cut the guys out of the car and now they're flying them to the hospital. If someone needs to be flown to the hospital in America, that is bad news. So Chris and I turned our car around and went to where the hospital was. I called our team leader, David, and I said, "There's been an accident. We don't know what's wrong, but they're heading back to Tyler, the town." So David drove his wife and 4 children to his parents' house, 2 hours, turned his car back around, drove 3 hours to get to the hospital, all the while mobilizing all the resources we would need to take care of our friends and their families as their parents arrived. Over the next couple of weeks, David ably led our team as we had to restructure and rework who was taking care of our friends' responsibilities. But more importantly, he helped us process the trauma of this near-death experience and the grief of the ongoing medical challenges our friends were facing. He was a true leader. Many of you know that teams is one of my favorite topics. Another one is leadership. When you think of influential leaders, what comes to your mind? Who is influential to you? Who influences your thoughts about leadership? As a historian, I have lots of opportunities to look at leaders. There are negative ones, and there are positive ones. And I can learn from the negative examples, but I want to be influenced by the positive ones. Now, we have just come through a really important time of year for both Muslim and Christian believers. We've just finished Ramadan last week for Muslims, and Easter was a couple weeks ago. Jesus is considered an important prophet in Islam, and he's the center of Christianity. But what many people don't know about Jesus is that he was a great teacher. He was a master storyteller. He used word pictures, metaphors. He was always thinking of his audience and how to help them understand his message. Jesus would have been a great Toastmaster. But one of the things that Jesus talks about a lot is leadership. And one of the word pictures he uses is that of a shepherd. He knows his audience. He knows that they know the culture of shepherding in the ancient Near East. We know a culture of shepherding, right? Here in Kazakhstan. Every day right now in the spring, when I leave school, there's this flock of sheep on the hills on our road. And they are awesome. And last last Friday, there was this bunch of, it was a play date for the lambs. They were all gathered in this pile of dirt, and they were just playing, and they were delightful. And the shepherd is always nearby, right? But how often do you think of a shepherd as a leader? Well, first of all, shepherds have to have vision. They know their desired future, which is the success of their flock. And it's a desired future because the success of the flock determines the success of their family. If that flock fails, they don't make any money. If that flock fails, their family's future is uncertain. And so shepherds have a really strong vision of what they want to accomplish as a shepherd. Because of that, they take their responsibilities very seriously. And the first responsibility of a shepherd is to lead his flock. Sometimes you'll see the shepherd leading from the front. He'll be going ahead, and you've got a line of sheep behind him. Other times, you see him with a staff, and he's kind of scooting the sheep along to get them to go. A shepherd knows his sheep. He knows them by name. And the sheep know the shepherd. A shepherd has an intimate relationship with those sheep. So much so that the sheep will not follow another shepherd. Another shepherd who is the same experience, knows all the right words, knows all the right leadership moves for those sheep. They won't follow if it's not their shepherd, if they don't know his voice. And a shepherd will leave his whole flock to go after the one that went off on its own, to bring that sheep back into the sheep community. The second responsibility of the shepherd is to take his sheep to pasture. And when we think of pasture, it's where can they get good grass to eat, water to drink, a safe, peaceful place to rest. If a sheep does not have a safe and peaceful space, then they'll become stressed. And if they're stressed, they won't eat. They won't rest. They won't reproduce. And there is no future with those sheep. The third thing that the shepherd needs to do is know the condition of his flock. He needs to anticipate the pregnancies in his flock. He needs to know when it's going to be time for the mamas to deliver so that they're in a good position. He needs to know which ones are injured or sick that might slow the flock up. He needs to be aware of potential danger. Are there thieves? Are there wild animals? In fact, a shepherd is prepared to lay down his life for his sheep because the sheep represents the future for his family. He has a vision. And that takes a lot of courage and confidence. So it's kind of an unconventional example of leadership of the leader, but Jesus uses that. And then he calls himself the Good Shepherd. But immediately previous to this description of the life of a shepherd, Jesus is actually responding to a situation that has come up. There was a blind man named Bartimaeus. And Bartimaeus sat outside the temple gate and begged every day because he was blind. Because of his blindness, he couldn't go into the temple and worship. He had to sit outside. And everybody knew it. And everybody thought that he had done something wrong, or his parents had. Because that was the culture. If you're blind, or if something happens to you that's bad, it must be punishment for something that you've done. And so Bartimaeus every day would beg outside the temple. Everybody knew him. Everybody saw him. But he never went in. He could never participate in community. Until one day Jesus came along and healed him of his blindness. Everybody knew it happened because everyone knew that he used to be the blind guy begging. And now he is the seeing guy who's walking around and actually celebrating. And they celebrated with him. But the religious leaders of the time did not. The religious leaders of the time also had a vision. And their vision was to preserve their position and their power. You see, Jesus healed Bartimaeus on a holy day, on their Sabbath, when no work is supposed to be done on that day. And they didn't like it. So instead of celebrating with the people and Bartimaeus that he could see now, they got mad at Jesus. And they said, you shouldn't have done that. This is a Sabbath. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. You see, they were committed to preserving their position. And so they had set up rules that burdened the people. Maybe some of you have heard of the 10 Commandments that God gave Moses. 10. The religious leaders had an additional 600 that they wanted the people to follow. And I don't know about you, but when my mom gave me 3 rules, I struggled as a child. 600 seems impossible. But it was by these 600 that you were measured by how good you were as a Jewish believer. They also, in order to preserve their power, made alliances with the Romans. At this time, Israel, like all the known world, was part of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire had soldiers and garrisons everywhere because they wanted to preserve the peace. The Romans care about peace more than anything. The religious leaders cared about power. The Romans like it too. Let's work together and develop power for ourselves. But it turned out to be a pretty oppressive system for the normal Jewish person, because they either had to pay attention to the Romans or to the religious leaders, and they weren't doing either very well. Finally, while a shepherd will go after one sheep to bring him back into the flock, these religious leaders were not satisfied with the answers that Bartimaeus was giving. They kept wanting him to say, that man, he broke the rules. He did something bad. And Bartimaeus was like, I can see. What do you mean? And when Bartimaeus refused to agree with them that Jesus was bad, they kicked him out. His blindness, at first, is what kept him out of the community. And then it was the religious leaders, because they said, you're not agreeing with us, you're out. And Jesus then says, I'm a good shepherd. He is saying that in response to these religious leaders. And so then Jesus begins, again, we think about leadership. And he gives these really practical ways that a good shepherd leads his sheep. My leader, David, when he was leading us and our team, he was a good shepherd. He was someone who thought about the condition of his flock. I was a newlywed. I had just moved to Texas. I had just gotten married. I had a new position, a new team, a new location, a new stage of life. Everything was new to me. David had been there for several years. He knew the students. He knew the team. He knew everything. And then he had me as his new co-leader. David empowered me. He platformed me. He set me up so that I knew where I was going. And he knew how I was doing, with lots of patience and lots of grace. He was so kind and patient as I was starting to get to know the lay of the land. He provided a great environment for us. I had come in to be his co-leader. I had expertise in some new restructuring that they had done, and he wasn't threatened by my expertise. He didn't think, oh, she must be lower so that I can maintain this position. He listened to me. He was willing to learn from me. And he moved forward with our team so that they were also willing to learn from me. He wasn't threatened by who I was. And he had a strong vision of where it was that we were going. So as a team, he took us there. And when we were sad about our friends, he was able to bring us back. And this is where we're going, and at the same time, caring for us. Which brings us to the thought, what unites a shepherd, Jesus, David? It's this quality of caring. My title is not Tony Stark. Because as much as I love Tony Stark, and Iron Man is my favorite of the Avengers, I don't actually think he's a great leader. He's brilliant, and he's cool, but we don't see him taking care of his people all that well, right? He is fairly arrogant, concerned with his own power. It's how we get Ultron and ultimately Thanos. He makes some bad decisions as a leader. Some of you, as I talk about what kind of a leader Jesus is describing, may think, I've never followed a leader like that. Some of us may not think of ourselves as leaders. Or maybe our positions right now in our jobs isn't as a leader, right? But we can become that leader, even if we haven't had the opportunity to follow that leader. For me, successful leaders care for their people. When the car accident happened, DT turned his car around and came back to the hospital. That is the kind of leader I want to follow. But even more than that, it's the kind of leader that I am determined to become. Thank you.